Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are in the very early stages of the 2031 to 2032 offseason, but we've started to get some of our arbitration eligible players signed. If you've been watching closely, you would see right here that our fan interest has gone from 97 at the end of the season up to over 100, and that's because within the last couple of days we've signed John Featherston, Kyle Backus, Vance Honeycutt, Cam Collier, Sean Sullivan, and Franklin Heel to their agreements to avoid arbitration. And in the cases of Collier and Honeycutt, the fans were excited about those signings. And as we prepare for the actual arbitration hearings, which hopefully we won't have any when all is said and done, and the beginning of free agency in a few weeks, we are potentially closing in on a trade. And it's going to be a somewhat costly one. We're going to include Takao Ota, who we've talked about in previous episodes, a one-dimensional slugger who's been with us for the last 4 years, but his arbitration number is expected to be about $6 million next year. Dave McCarthy, a 23-year-old minor league pitcher who was a 9th-round draft pick in 2027, looks like he could be a back of the rotation guy potentially at the major league level. Like the fact that he throws in the mid to high 90s. Don't love the fact that he's 23 years old and he's only made it as high A ball, where although he did strike out 210 batters this past year, his ERA was still close to 5. But a guy who could definitely contribute at the major league level. Toshimitsu Kato, who has been an excellent defensive player for us over the past several seasons. After we signed him as a minor league free agent out of Japan, but just does not have a major league bat, unfortunately. He didn't even play in the majors this past season for us. He hit .238 in AAA. Does have one option year left, but if he helps get the deal done, I don't see him being a big contributor at the major league level, and would rather get the $1 million that he's going to be due on an auto renewal next year off the books. And then Drew Graham, who is a 4th-round pick from 2024, who has come up through our system, made his major league debut at the end of this past season. View him as a back end of the rotation, back end of the bullpen type of guy. Certainly a guy who can contribute at the major league level, but let's be honest, he's spent the last 3 years in AA, AAA, and AAA, and had .474, .498, and 4.73 ERAs, and he's going to be 26 years old by the start of next season. Not a big-time prospect. So we need to include those 4 players, as well as one of the top prospects in our system or some lesser prospects, and we're going to include a lesser prospect to ultimately get this deal done. And we're going to pick up the 27-year-old pitcher Chris Sabatka from the Dodgers. And when we look at what Sabatka's done over the course of his major league career, he's been a pretty average-ish major league pitcher. And you could certainly make the case that the worst 2 years of his major league career are the past 2 seasons. So there's an argument that he's really nothing exceptional, and I'm not picking him up to potentially be exceptional. I think he's a solid 3 or 4 starter. I don't love the fact that he's really just a 3-pitch guy, particularly with the splitter and the sinker not being exceptional, but he does have an excellent fastball. He's got a lot of stamina, good personality, and his stuff, his movement, and his control are all above average, even though that hasn't necessarily always resulted in incredible success on the mound. The Dodgers also recently signed him to an extension, so they bought out next year an arbitration season, which was going to be about $6 million for materially less than he would have been due and another arbitration year, but then 2 years of free agency for an average of about $7.4 million over the next 4 years. So it's not a horrible contract. And I'm not picking up Sabatka thinking he's going to be an ace for us. I'm hoping he's a solid 3 or 4 starter. But when we look at his 55 stuff, his 60 movement, and his 60 control, along with enough stamina to really like him as a starter, there's 9 pitchers in Major League Baseball that meet those criteria: 55 stuff, 60 movement, 60 control, with at least 45 stamina. Now, granted, we could put the stamina down a little bit, and clearly there could be a guy with 55 control, 80 movement, 55 stuff, 80 movement, and 55 control, who's probably a better pitcher than Sabatka, who this list doesn't pick up. I'm not trying to say he's one of the top 9 starters in baseball, but what I am trying to say is he's a pretty useful pitcher potentially. And not even all of these 9 guys are starters, because Marco Jimenez from the Yankees, real nice pitcher, but he's only a 2-pitch guy. And you look at most of these guys: Yuri Perez making $20 million, Yoander Suarez $30 million, Shane McClanahan going to be a free agent, going to be looking for well over $20 million next year. Getting Sabatka at about $7.5 million is not too bad. I did look at Jeff Dover and Jesus Apita, the 2 really young guys who are guys that we could try to build around for the next decade potentially, and obviously would love to add somebody like Espitia to our rotation. He has been an excellent pitcher in the first 2.5 years of his major league career, just led the American League in innings pitched and ERA, as well as quality start percentage this past year, after leading the American League in WHIP in his first full season in the majors. But we just threw an offer together of the 3 top prospects in our farm system, as well as Samuel Basallo, a 3-time Silver Slugger winner, who's in his mid to late 20s, and another decent player together, and they wouldn't even talk to us about it. So obviously would love to add a player like Espitia or Dover, but just not practical to do at this point. So I feel like Sabatka is the most reasonable path for us to potentially try to pursue. And we can get him at this point. If I could go to the right trade offer, because I have been going back and forth with them for a long time. The only additional guy that we need to add in is Dan Pentecost, a first baseman who we drafted in the 10th round, 2026. Doesn't look like he's going to develop into much useful at the major league level. He's 24 years old at this point. He's been in high A ball for the last 3 years. We haven't really felt any need to promote him. Good personality, not a bad guy to have in our system, but certainly not someone to hold up a deal about. So Ota, McCarthy, Katu, and Graham for Sabatka. Ota, we're getting money off of our books. We'll probably keep Basallo. It's going to save us money at the major league level because Sabatka is signed for less next year than Ota will likely be making an arbitration. McCarthy and Graham both could be useful major league pitchers, but they're 24 and 25. They're not young, and they're not as good as the 27-year-old Sabatka. So I would rather, even though we're giving up a lot of players, we're certainly getting the best player in this deal. And I think anytime you're getting the best player in the deal, there's an argument to make it. Kato, I'm done with. I just don't think he's ever going to hit enough to be a useful guy at the major league level. And Pentecost, I don't mind adding in. So we are going to add Dan Pentecost into the deal. and ship them Ota, McCarthy, Katu, and Graham, in addition to Dan Pentecost, to bring Sabatka on board. It's going to fill the hole of Hayden Yinger in our rotation, and also bringing him on board will certainly make it easier for us to potentially move Shohei Ohtani to right field next year, rather than using him as a pitcher in what will likely be his last year for us with the Buffalo Wings. So Sabatka should give us a good professional arm for our starting rotation, and again give us a little more flexibility to potentially move Ohtani out of the rotation depending on how free agency and the rest of the offseason goes. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. Fans are pleased that we brought Sabatka on board. And with Ota gone now and Sabatka on board, we're starting to open up a little bit of money now, which isn't the worst thing to see. Obviously, some of that is helped by the trade. Some of it is helped by signing the arbitration-eligible players in most cases for a little less than what they were looking for. We are going to put out an offer to Samuel Basallo right now. He's a very similar player to Ota, but as we talked about in our last episode, we think Basallo is a little better in terms of his ratings. He's certainly a little better, you could argue much better, in terms of the production he's put up over his first 4 seasons of the majors. And although he's also a very limited defensive player, he does at least have the ability to play catcher for us in a pinch if we needed him to. And we don't have a ton of left-handed bats on the team right now, particularly with the departure of Ota, so I don't think we want to move on from both Ota and Basallo. So we're going to make an offer to Basallo, try to bring him back next year, and that's probably our big activity until we get to the start of free agency. One other thing that we are going to do is we are going to remove the qualifying offer we made to Hayden Yinger. Dralix had some thoughts on this in response to our question from our last episode, which I appreciate. But Yinger's been telling us, hey, I want $22.4 million a year for the next 4 years, which made me feel pretty safe that we could give him a qualifying offer for about $19 million next year, and he would not accept it. But when I look at the upcoming free agents, it seems like Yinger may only be looking for about $4 million when you look at the sheet here. And if that is really the case, and he really just thinks he's not going to be making a ton of money, and for whatever reason wants us to just offer him a boatload to stay with us, there's a pretty good chance that he could potentially accept that $18.9 million qualifying offer, which would ruin all of our financial flexibility for the upcoming off season. And particularly with the fact that we now have Sabatka on board, I don't think there's any need to take the risk of having Yinger opt into that QO. Clearly, in a perfect world, would love to keep the QO out there if we knew he wasn't going to take it, so we could get some type of draft pick compensation, maybe a third rounder, depending on where he signs for, how long he signs for, how much he signs for. But I'm not going to let the opportunity to maybe pick up one extra draft pick potentially saddle us with a contract that would essentially have us go into the offseason with no money to spend when we do need to fix a few positions on the roster. So bringing Sabatka on board gives us another solid major league starter, gives us the optionality to, as I talked about, potentially move Ohtani to right field for this upcoming year, and also makes me feel a little better about not making that qualifying offer to Yinger, because we've got a major league pitcher who could potentially be as good or better than Yinger now signed for next season at about a third of what that qualifying offer to Yinger would have been. And as we've simmed ahead a few days, started signing a number of our minor league free agents, and importantly, we also did get Samuel Basallo signed for $8.9 million for the upcoming season. So definitely the roster is starting to take shape at this point. Basallo will be back at either DH or first base, most likely DH. So as we think about starters for next year, the only positions as far as our everyday lineup where we need to find a starter at this point are first base to replace Ota, who we traded away, and then right field, where we had kind of a revolving door last season. Honestly, we've had a revolving door at that position kind of since we traded Jace Barofin, who was the first-round draft pick in our organization. Played with us for 5 seasons. We traded him away thinking he was making a little money for what he is with the contract that we signed him to before last season began. Left ourselves with a bit of a hole in right field. As I talked about earlier, we can definitely fill that hole in right field with Ohtani, which would mean that we would be going in with a rotation next year of Andrew Painter, Harleen Susana, and Sean Sullivan as holdovers. Jorge Carrillo, the youngster who had a nice year out of the bullpen for us last year in his first full year in the majors, getting a shot as a starter. And then obviously the recently traded for Sabatka is our 5th starter. And if we're willing to go with that rotation, that lets us slide Mr. Ohtani into right field, which means that we're heading into the offseason with around $19 million. And first base is the only real significant hole we have to fill. Obviously, if we can find a way to add another starting pitcher who's a quality major league pitcher, we'd love to do that. Probably going to need an arm or two for the bullpen, and probably going to need a body or two for the outfield as backup outfielders. But certainly feel like we'd be heading into the offseason with more than enough money to add a first baseman, a backup outfielder, and a pitcher or two, particularly with the Rule 5 draft also available. And since we mentioned Jace Barofin, who we traded away last offseason, check in on what he did. And he had the best year of his career for the Yankees at the age of 29. So he had hit 24 homers for us each of his first 2 seasons, and never hit higher than 255 for us across 5 seasons with us. Went to the Yankees this year and batted 286 with 30 doubles, 33 home runs, by far a career best 144 WRC plus, by far a career best 31 WRAA, and by far a career best 5.3 WAR. So he definitely, with that left-handed bat, apparently enjoyed the short right porch in Yankee Stadium. Let's take a look at his batting splits, home versus away. And he was definitely more productive in Yankee Stadium, where he hit over 300 with 21 home runs and a OPS plus of 170. So he definitely enjoyed batting in Yankee Stadium, was part of his improvement. But he definitely had a better year than I would have expected, given his batting profile and the fact that through his mid to late 20s with us, he never put up numbers like that. So good for Barofin. We got his contract off the books. Basically, it was a contract dump to get him and Nick York off the books. Got Peyton Battenfield in return, who we ended up releasing. So with the year he had, certainly would feel that trade, at least for the near term, worked out in favor of the Yankees. But looking at his contract, where he's still going to be making $5.5 million a year on average for the next 3 years before that team option, I'll feel better about this upcoming season with Ohtani as our right fielder than I would with Barofin as our right fielder. That's for sure. And a pitcher who we picked up at the trade deadline, Luis Castillo, ended up winning the Mariano Rivera Award as the top reliever in the National League. Castillo, we brought him on for insurance for our rotation and expecting him to be a big-time arm in our bullpen as we tried to make a push towards a World Series. We ended up making it all the way to the NLCS, but he combined for 110 innings pitched between Seattle and Buffalo, and he was excellent in Buffalo with a 1.08 ERA and a whip below 1 over the 50 innings that he did pitch for us. Guy who on the year combined for only 11 saves with an 8-6 record, but excellent ERAs with both Seattle and Buffalo, and I guess the voters, even though he spent only half the season in the National League, felt like he had done enough in what was probably a bit of a down year for relievers, I would guess. The other guys who got a lot of first place votes were Mike Oliver from the Expos, 5-6 with 41 saves, 2.05 ERA, and 101 strikeouts in 70 1/3 innings. I could definitely see Oliver beating Castillo, and then Justin Yeager from the Cardinals got 5 first place votes, 5-7 with a league best 49 saves, 2.51 ERA. A little surprising to me that Castillo won the award, but a little bit of hardware for the Buffalo Wings trophy case, even though Castillo will not be back with us next year. He is looking for close to $15 million a year for 4 years, and he's going to be 39 years old before next season starts. So as well as he pitched for us this past year, he is not a long-term part of our plan. And as award season continues, we got some bad news and some good news in the Silver Slugger Awards. For the first time in his career, our designated hitter Samuel Basallo did not win the Silver Slugger Award, but we still had 2 Silver Sluggers with Deshaun Seifu and Vance Honeycutt, 2 homegrown players. Seifu, it is the first Silver Slugger of his career. Hit .291 for us, 46 doubles, 11 triples, stole 63 bases to lead the National League in steals for a 4th consecutive year. Was a above average offensive player. His 5.6 WAR was the second best of his career. Didn't even make an all-star team this year and didn't win a Gold Glove this year. But he does get the first Silver Slugger of his career. And then Vance Honeycutt, also a first-time Silver Slugger winner for the 8th round pick back in 2024. Missed some time with that injury that has turned him fragile at the beginning of this year, but once he was back in the lineup from that injury suffered late in the 2030 season, he was very productive for us this year. .287 average, 26 homers, 96 ribbies, also stole 39 bases, 5 WAR on the season. And as we've talked about in the past with Honeycutt, the thing that I enjoy most about him is just the consistency from year to year that he delivers. Over the 5 years of his major league career, his lowest WRC plus is 120 and his highest is 127. We know exactly what we're going to be getting from him every year, and it is well above average offensive production, the ability to steal close to 40 bases with a very high success rate, and decent play in left field with that 60 range and 60 error rating. Not the greatest arm in the world, but still a pretty solid defensive left fielder as well. So congrats to Deshaun Seifu and Vance Honeycutt, a couple of homegrown Buffalo Wings who were named Silver Slugger winners here in 2031. And a little bit more hardware. We were named Manager of the Year. So that is a first-time award since I don't normally play as manager, and I do think the reaction there is about what my reaction would be. I don't give a darn about the award, I growled to reporters. I just want this team to win championships. And although it's nice to get that Manager of the Year award, we still have not won a championship, even though we've made the playoff those last 4 years. So nice to get the Manager of the Award honor, but I would much prefer to be hoisting a World Series trophy. And although our Buffalo Wings did win some end-of-season hardware this year with the Reliever of the Year award for Castillo, the Gold Gloves for Seifu and Honeycutt, and the Manager of the Year award, not surprisingly, we did not win either of the big awards in the National League. Jesus Espitia, who we were just talking about, the fact that we couldn't get him, even giving up the top 3 prospects in our system plus more, and it wasn't even sniffing a chance of getting him. Not surprisingly, when he is a 25-year-old who can now add unanimous Cy Young Award winner to his resume. In the National League, Pierce George and Jamie Hayes. Looks like for some reason they gave the award to George. It says they were tied. Did they both? They should both get it. 16 first place votes and 176 points. Pierce George, 2031 Cy Young Award. So 3 in a row for Pierce George and Jamie Hayes. Okay, they do split it. Like the good old Keith Hernandez and Willie Stargell MVP award in 1979, I believe. So even though they said George was the winner, they do note that he ends up tied with Hayes, and they both get a little merit badge for that. So that was kind of cool to see. Jorge Carrillo, the youngster who we were talking about earlier, he potentially may be taking Ohtani's spot in the starting rotation next year if we move Ohtani to either a DH or a right field kind of role. And interestingly, Carrillo, who was 3-0 with a 2.37 ERA for us, working almost exclusively as a reliever, and Ohtani, who was 11-10 with a 3.52 ERA, working exclusively as a starter, were the only Buffalo Wings to get Cy Young Award votes this year. But looking at Pierce George with his 3rd consecutive Cy Young Award, 13-12 with a league best 317 strikeouts, 107 WHIP, and 6.6 WAR. And Jamie Hayes, who he tied with 16-7, the 16 wins tied him for the league best, and the 2.65 ERA and the 61 FIP minus were both best in the league. Hayes is another very interesting young pitcher, similar to Mr. Espitia, who we have tried to make some offers to the Pirates for, and obviously been rebuffed at all occasions. AL MVP, Bobby Witt Jr. There is a blast from the past for our 2023 OOTP playthrough, where we started with the Royals and Bobby Witt Jr. He never won an MVP for us in that playthrough, but led the AL with 632 at-bats and 194 hits this year. Also 110 runs scored, 42 doubles, 8 triples, 30 homers, 102 ribbies, 13 steals, 307 average, 7 WAR on the year. Just really filled up the stat sheet all over the season, and a nice year for first-time MVP Bobby Witt Jr. And Vlad Guerrero Jr. Edges Ellie De La Cruz to win the National League MVP. Vlad Guerrero Jr., 301 average, 37 homers, 105 ribbies. De La Cruz, 272, 37, 110. Our Silver Slugger Award winners, Vance Honeycutt and Deshaun Seifu, both received some first place votes, and Adley Rutler received some votes for MVP, not first place votes to be more accurate. And Cam Collier, our new third baseman, and our catcher Adley Rutschman also received some first place votes too, but none of those four players were really serious candidates for the award, unfortunately. And with award season now complete and all of our arbitration eligible players either signed or, in the case of Ota, traded away, not a lot left for us to do before we get to free agency. So what we are going to do now is check in on the international amateur free agent class and spend a little more time with those players. We did run our first camp back in October, basically just brought in the 6 highest rated hitters and the 4 highest rated pitchers. Over the last month, we have scouted all of those players once. Still don't have great accuracy on them, and likely never will before the draft. You get the best accuracy and the best bang for your buck, obviously, with the players that you bring into the camps that you run and sending scouts into the field. It seems like in a best case scenario, by the course of the international amateur free agent signing period, even if you've scouted them all 3 times, I think one time I even was able to scout them all 4 times when I just ignored everything else as far as what I'd like to scout and just focused completely on the international amateur free agents. In a best case scenario, I've found have average scouting accuracy on most of the people in those scenarios, and then there's some where it's still not even average. So the bang for the buck is in the players that you bring to the camp. So let's decide who we want to run through our training camp here in the month of November. And taking a look at the position players, as I mentioned, brought the top 6 prospects in terms of potential through camp last time, and we still think they're the top 6 prospects. We've got average scouting accuracy on all of them. You can see a mix between low and average for most of the other hitters, which is actually pretty good considering that we've only explicitly scouted each of these players once, better than I've traditionally done. Probably the fact that we have a little more money in scouting this year than we have over the last few years has helped with that a bit, in terms of getting quick responses back, certainly, and maybe in terms of more accurate responses, although I think that is primarily driven in the game by our scouting director, Rick Hahn, and his international scouting ratings, which do happen to be outstanding. But back to those top 6 prospects, who we'll spend a little more time with now, and it's likely to be an episode or 2 until we actually get to the international amateur free agent signing period. So if you have thoughts on what we should do, always love to hear them. Humberto Aguayo, a left fielder out of the Dutch Antilles, looks like he could have tremendous home run power. Everything else, definitely a question. We're only average scouting accuracy on him at this point. Probably will bring him back to at least one more camp, but with high league interest and the fact that he's probably going to end up going for closer to max than that $1.2 million, I don't know if he's a guy we're going to spend a ton of time on. Jorge Berrios, 17-year-old catcher out of Venezuela, a very interesting bat, particularly for a catcher. Not a great defensive catcher, not the best personality in the world, but certainly someone we'll probably bring back again. Edgar Carlo, 16-year-old second baseman out of the Dominican, doesn't really have a position you'd like to play him at defensively, especially given that he's only 5'11". Looks like he could be I wouldn't even want to play him in left field. He's a first baseman or a DH. Now, granted, if that contact really develops to 80 with 65 home run power and above average eye, he certainly is a player you'd feel comfortable if he maxes out playing at DH, especially with that durability to be out there for 150 games a year. Don't love the low leadership and work ethic, though. Interesting prospect, but if there was somebody to not bring back to the camp, I think I'd probably lean towards him. Alejandro Morales, a center fielder, more of a corner outfielder in terms of his defensive prospects. Looks like he could have well above average contact and home run power, good durability. Joep Spreckley from Aruba, a potentially exceptional bat, 80 contact, 80 home run power, 70 I. He can't really do anything else. All he can do is hit. But he is a 17-year-old today. Happy birthday, Joep Boo Boo Spreckley. I mean, if he comes anywhere close towards maxing out contact, maxing out home run power with an eye that's well above average, he is a potentially devastating offensive force. He can really only play first base, and don't even love him at first base, so he's probably a DH in a perfect scenario, but if that bat develops, he is an incredible offensive force potentially, and unlike a lot of these other guys that we've looked at so far, he doesn't really have any negative personality traits, although unfortunately he doesn't have any big positives either. Last of the 4.5 to 5 star prospects that we've already brought through camp once is Jorge Tinajero, a first baseman out of the Dominican. Another guy, no defense, no speed, potentially excellent contact with a little bit of pop and a decent eye. Does have high leadership. Probably will bring him back through camp, even though at his top end, I don't think he's as good as a lot of these other guys that we've looked at, but do like the fact that he actually has a positive personality trait. And there are also a handful of 3.5 and 4 star prospects we'll take a look at here on the video. Obviously, I'll spend some more time offline figuring out exactly who I want to bring into camp. I want to share as much information with those of you who are inclined to share your thoughts with me as possible. So maybe there's a diamond in the rough here that will identify that I should think about going after. Center fielder Julio Anaya, like the durability, like the high work ethic, kind of a corner outfielder. Potentially interesting-ish bat, a little more speed than a lot of the guys we've looked at, which isn't saying a ton because he's still not all that great a base runner. But I could see bringing him into camp. Christos Cavazos, a right fielder out of Venezuela. Love the personality. If you had high intelligence, he's got the whole package. Also, not the worst bat in the world. He is a corner outfielder, but he's better defensively than a lot of these guys that we've looked at. Has a little bit of speed, not that he's ever going to be a particularly proficient or frightening base runner for others' teams to think about. And if everything develops, he's got an interesting bat, and given that personality with the high work ethic, the high leadership, everything is in his favor as far as potentially developing. I think Christos Cavazos is a guy who I would be inclined to bring into camp and get to know a little better. Supposedly league interest in him is low, and he's not looking for a ton of money right now. Girolamo Caccadino, left fielder out of Italy. Another guy with a decent personality, okay defensively, not a lot of speed, durable. His bat not quite as interesting to me as Cavazos. Eddie Lujan out of the Dominican, another corner outfielder, not a horrible bat, not as good a personality as the last couple guys. Still think I would default to Cavazos over Anaya, Caccadino, and Lujan as far as who to bring in. And then a couple of third basemen. Alejandro Ramos out of Nicaragua. Not a horrible prospect. I don't know if he's exciting enough for me to take an invite away from one of the people that we've got invites to, though, particularly because he and the other third baseman, Vargas, are both looking for $1.5 million, which is as much as some of those higher regarded prospects at this point. And Ramos supposedly has high league interest already. Last but not least, Luis Vargas out of the Dominican. I think I like him a little better. The personality is better. The defense still a lot of variability in terms of those ratings. The bat could be slightly positive. If we're going to add somebody in, though, I think it's probably Christos Cavazos, who I'd like to get to know a little more about. So the question is whether we want to take an invite away from one of those top 6 hitting prospects that we've already looked at, or is there one of the 4 pitching prospects that we've looked at who maybe we'll want to take an invite away from. So moving on to the pitchers, and as I mentioned, we brought the top 4 pitching prospects into camp last month, and as some of you have noted in the comments to previous episodes, and I tend to agree with this assessment, we've got to start returning a little bit of our focus to bringing some pitchers into our farm system. 3/4 Badger has suggested just going hog wild to try to bring on some starting pitchers through international free agency and the draft this upcoming year, which I agree with, and Not My Four-Ply, I think, has a similar view, given that he commented on the dearth of quality pitchers in our minor league organization, which I can't disagree with. Those of you who have watched me in other series know that I tend to love to draft pitchers and tend to love to pick them up in international amateur free agency as well. Just love to try to throw as many numbers out there as possible and build a high quality pitching staff, because I like pitching. Used to pitch, never could hit that well, so I'm biased towards pitchers, but tend to try to just win the game of building a pitching staff by just putting incredible numbers of pitchers through my farm system, and I definitely have not been doing that with the Buffalo Wings. So I'm inclined to kind of probably bring at least 4, if not 5 pitchers, depending on what these guys look like, back through. But let's see, now that we know them a little better, what they really look like. The only 5-star prospect is Julio Buccio out of the Dominican. Looks like a guy who could have he could have a 2 to 5 pitch repertoire, most likely a 3 or 4 pitch repertoire of major league quality pitches when all is said and done. Potentially excellent stuff, above average movement and control. 17 years old, throwing in the low to mid 90s. Not a perfect personality, not a perfect pitching prospect, but probably someone we want to get to know a little better, even though league interest in him is very high and he's looking for some good money. Juan Ramos, another 16-year-old, also out of the Dominican, potentially a 3-pitch guy with well above average stuff and movement and control that could be a bit above average. Not a perfect personality, but not huge red flags either. Already throwing in the low to mid 90s at barely 16 years old. Sergio Santibaez out of the Dominican, also guy who could end up as a reliever if that changeup doesn't develop and the curveball really has only 30 potential. He's a 2-pitch guy. His profile suggests he could be a pretty good relief pitcher, has a decent personality, but compared to those other 2 guys, Buccio and Ramos, Santibaez certainly looks to me like more likely to potentially become a reliever someday. But when you look at the potential of stuff, movement, and control, he also stands out compared to those other 2 guys in terms of his top-end upside. And another guy with a lot of top-end upside is Juan Heller out of Nicaragua. But he is a guy who is almost 100% guaranteed to only be a reliever. Looks like he could be an excellent reliever. Love the durability, like some of the personality traits. Doesn't throw quite as hard as the other guys at this point, but he is a finesse pitcher. So he's going to mix in that fastball with the slider, and it looks like the slider is his key. But his stuff and his movement, both potentially excellent with above average control. So all of these guys definitely have their merits. We'll take a look at these other 4 prospects that are at least viewed by us as 2.5 or higher star prospects. David Corona from the Dominican has some personality issues with the low leadership and low work ethic. Love the fact that there's a potential 5 to 6 pitch arsenal, although none of the pitchers are particularly exceptional. Looks like he could have pretty good control if everything happens to develop. But with some of those negative personality traits and the fact that he's looking for close to $3.5 million, probably not someone that will add into the invite list. Juan Aranda out of the Dutch Antilles. The question with him is just how good his stuff is going to be. Doesn't throw quite as hard as a lot of the other prospects we've looked at, and even at the top end, his stuff doesn't look like it's major league quality, so he's going to have to get by guile and finesse with movement and control and coaxing batters into hitting ground balls. Gian Andrea Macchiocci, dual Venezuelan and Italian citizenship, low work ethic, very nice high stamina, like the durability. Best case scenario for him, though, looks like a back of the rotation type of guy. He'd have to develop perfectly to be a 5th starter, and with that low work ethic, the chances of him developing perfectly are probably not all that high. And then the oldest prospect here is Generosp Villegas, another guy who looks like probably a 5th starter if everything develops perfectly. Do like that he's a lefty, but he's also going to be 19 years old right about the time the DSL season is starting next year. So I don't know that there's anyone else I really want to jump on and bring to camp other than the 4 pitchers that we already have. So we're going to keep the invites out to them, and it's just a matter of who we are going to uninvite to the next camp. And I think I had mentioned, I believe I was leading towards Edgar Carlo, simply driven by the low leadership and particularly the low work ethic. But that profile is potentially really interesting. I like the durability with Morales. He is looking for a lot of money, and his high interest in him and our relationship with him is the weakest of anybody. Granted, it's still relatively early stages. Spreckley definitely going to bring in. Don't know if we can land this guy. Don't know if we'll even make an offer to the guy, but want to learn more about him and what we think his true potential is. Maybe we'll learn a little bit more about his personality over time. Tinajero, I like the personality with him. He certainly doesn't seem to have as high potential as some of these other guys. Barrios, don't love the personality, but still a pretty interesting bat. And then Humberto Aguayo. Plus contact and excellent home run power is not a bad combination. But he's a pretty uninspiring prospect otherwise for a 5-star guy. No speed, below average defensively. Does have the high work ethic that I like to see with prospects. And I may end up regretting this, but Edgar Carlo is the guy that I'm going to uninvite. He's durable. If that bat fully develops, it's really interesting. But as we talked about, he doesn't really have a position to play. I don't love the low work ethic and the low leadership, although the high intelligence and adaptability make me feel a little better about him. But the low work ethic is a problem in terms of development of these guys. And I just have a feeling his demand is going to end up being close to, $4.75 million, maybe even more than that, depending on who goes for him. So we are going to remove Mr. Carlo from the training, and that will allow us to bring in our man crush that we have on Christos Kavatsos, loving his personality and loving the potential batting profile if everything works out, liking the fact that he's got a little more speed and a little more defensive ability than a lot of what we've seen from some of these other international prospects over recent years. So we're going to bring Kavatsos in. Carlo we say goodbye to. We'll run the camp and see if we have any big shifts in what we think these players' potentials are. And I guess Kavatsos was the only one that was locked in, unfortunately, so I'll have to change that. Still looks like a broadly similar profile, I believe. So now we've added all of these guys back to our list. I think we'll probably go with the same crew in December. Kavatsos is definitely interesting to me if league interest remains low. He's also got the lowest demand out of all of these guys. If we could potentially, make a play for Kavatsos with one or two of the pitchers, that could be an interesting international amateur free agent period for us. But as we've talked about, Boo Boo Spreckley and that potential batting profile is incredibly intriguing to me as well. And he's going to be looking for big money from the start. So it's probably going to come down to a decision. Do we just want to go all in on one player in the likes of Spreckley? Or do we think that there's a chance that we could get somebody less expensive, a Kavatsos, an Aguayo, a Tinahiro, and combine them with one or two of these pitchers? But again, some of these pitchers are going to be getting expensive too. We may be being ambitious in terms of what we think we can actually accomplish in January when the IAFA signing period begins, but might as well go in with an ambitious attitude, thinking that we can do a ton. And if we don't do everything that we hope, at least we shot for the moon, so to speak. And looking at the evaluation there, looks like we think that Allaire and Kavatsos may have a little more potential than previously anticipated. On the other hand, the pitchers Santi Baez and Julio Buccio, we may not think that they have quite as much upside as we used to when all is said and done, coming out of the second of the 4 IAFA training camps we plan on running. And we've made it to the start of free agency. And we're going to have close to $21 million to spend. And again, that's boosting scouting and player development slightly from where they were last year. Obviously, could invest more in those departments depending on how the offseason goes. But with close to $21 million to spend and not a ton of holes to fill, I think we can likely do what we need to do if we get creative this offseason between the free agency market, the Rule 5 draft, and the trade market. As I mentioned earlier, with Basallo back and a likely move of Ohtani back to being an everyday player, that should cover between DH, first base, and right field 2 of those 3 positions. So we basically need, in a perfect world, a first baseman or a right fielder who can hit a little bit and is good defensively, so we can fill the DH slot in one of those other positions with the defensively challenged Basallo and the aging Ohtani. So that's our biggest hole. As we talked about, probably could use a backup outfielder Right now, assuming Honeycutt, Featherston, and Otani are our starters across left, center, and right, we'd be looking at the likes of Shaylin Polanco and Rafael Rodillo, who have both spent a little bit of time with us as backup outfielders. I think we would like to do better than those two, if at all possible. And then pitching wise, we need to add an arm or two for the pen. And obviously, if there's an opportunity to add a starting pitcher, I'd love to do it. So let's see who's actually made it to the market. Take a quick review of the international free agents first, and just basically looking for anyone who has interesting amounts of potential according to our scout. Whoa. First baseman Hisato Suda. Not a entirely different type of profile than Ota, the guy that we just dealt away. Looks like he is potentially a better contact hitter than Ota. But as you can see, he's also, even though the signing period just opened, signed with the Philadelphia Phillies already. Is a minor league free agent. Apparently there may have been some tampering involved there with Mr. Suda. Wouldn't have minded trying to bring him on board, but unfortunately he is part of the Phillies organization. Other than that, not a lot of big-time guys. I mean, I'll spend a little more time with those guys that look like they had two-ish star potential just to see if there might be somebody we want to bring into our farm system. But doesn't look like there are any massive difference makers there. Wander Franco is going to be looking for big bucks. Don't really need a third baseman. I guess we could play him at first. Shane McClanahan certainly could help us as a starting pitcher. I think he's going to be looking for too much money. Would love a Jackson Holiday or an Edwin Arroyo. But I tend to think those guys are going to be looking for too much money. I would never take a Houston Astro or even a former Houston Astro, if at all possible, as a Yankees fan. So I'm not going to be taking an aging Carlos Correa. Braden Taylor, 29-year-old first baseman. He would fit the bill for us for what we need. Don't love the fact that he's fragile, but would give us another left-handed hitter in the lineup. Certainly a bat that over the past few years has been above average major league bat, although it's trending in the wrong direction. Not incredible defensively, but certainly more competent at first base than the likes of Basallo. We'll kind of search in a more traditional way as the free agents now. Take a look at starting pitchers first. McClanahan is really the only top-end guy. Looking for about $24 million. Hayden Yinger, thanks again to Dralax for the thoughts on this. Think it may have been a good miss that we did not give him the $19 million qualifying offer when he said he wanted 4 years at $22 million a pop for us, because supposedly his demand is only $4 million. So either he's going to say he wants a ton of money to sign with us because he hates us, or he was playing a game of chicken with us. And yeah, he says he's only looking for $4 million. So I would not mind bringing Hayden Yinger back at that type of number. Is he a perfect pitcher? No. But over the 4 years he was with us, his average season was 10 wins, 6 losses, and a 3.36 ERA while starting 27 games for us a year. And basically had 3 full seasons and then 1 season where he pitched half a year, cut short by injuries. But he's been a pretty useful pitcher for us. I would not mind having Hayden Yinger back next year, and a $4 million number for him, to me, does not concern me at all. Cade Smith is listed as a starter now. He's got the arsenal. just not a ton of stamina. He's looking for $9 million a year and really wants to be a starter. He did start 27 games for Nashville last year, 36 games total, and only 124 and 2/3 innings. So it looks like he's kind of a 4-inning guy, 5 innings in a best case situation. He was either a starter for them or a closer. 27 games started and 7 saves in 36 games played. So interesting role for him. He was very effective. This is a guy who we had and we traded away because he was going to be making real big money. You may remember a year ago at this time, well, not quite this time, but a little over a year ago, we had Cade Smith and Munoz as 2 potential closers on our team. Neither is with us anymore. I don't know that I'd spend $9 million a year on Cade Smith. Honestly think Yinger might be the guy that I'm most interested in potentially, because the money he's looking for is not crazy, and it would give us another option for the starting rotation. Think he could be a more than competent reliever. And if we were able to bring someone like him on board, then there's no serious reservations in my mind about potentially moving Ohtani to be an everyday player. Looking at all the relievers who are available, obviously some pretty high-end guys looking for some decent money. Alex Vesla, not looking for a ton of money, but he's going to be out with a torn UCL for 3 months. Hasn't pitched since 2030. Question of what he looks like on the other side. But he was clearly a pretty productive pitcher before that injury. His injury proneness was normal before that injury. Don't know how good a scouting report we're going to get on him, given that he hasn't pitched since 2030 and he's still recovering from an injury for the next 3 months. But if the price on him is low enough, maybe you roll the dice and see if he can help us. Our old buddy Castillo just won the reliever of the year, looking for $17 million. Our old buddy Shane Bieber looking for over $11 million. He's fragile. Emmanuel Clase just doesn't have the stuff that he used to. We've tried the Garrett Crochet experience in Buffalo several years ago, and it did not. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't all that inspiring. Edwin Diaz, Camilo Doval, Nick Hernandez, a lot of kind of potential arms to bring into the bullpen available. So between free agency and the Rule 5 draft, definitely feel like we'll be able to find an arm or two for the bullpen. But right now, I think I'd be leaning towards maybe making an offer to Hayden Yinger. Moving to the top hitters that are going to be available on the free agent market this year, and clearly an Edwin Arroyo, a Wander Franco, a Jackson Holiday would be incredible to add to our team. But given the amount of money they're looking for, given that we feel like we're pretty set at second, third, and short with Seifu, Collier, and Hull respectively, spending more money that we actually have and going through everything necessary to bring one of those players on board is probably a luxury that we can't afford. And in the case of Arroyo and Holiday, those guys are also fragile. If we kind of move down the next notch in the market, though, there are guys here that are definitely intriguing. We don't need a center fielder with Featherston, but Dylan Carlson is certainly a guy who could play any position in the outfield potentially for us, who's got a pretty good bat, even though he's coming off of what is an off year for him with a 241 average and only 17 homers. Although I guess the 17 homers is actually pretty good in terms of what he's done. Hasn't had as much power as I would expect from a guy with 55 home run power. He's actually hit over 22 over 20 homers only twice in his career. Over the course of his career, he's a little bit above average in terms of his offensive performance. $19 million, probably not the play for us. Pete Crow Armstrong, a few years younger, another guy who could definitely play any position in the outfield defensively for us well. Not the greatest bat in the world. Over the course of his career, he's pretty much been an average-ish offensive player, almost a perfectly average offensive player if you believe OPS plus, WRC plus, and WRAA accurately describe what an average offensive player is. And he's also fragile, so I don't think he's a perfect answer. Nelvi Marte, another guy at a position that we don't really need, but he could certainly upgrade us a little bit at second base over Seifu, maybe allow us to turn Seifu into a corner outfielder. But he's fragile, 30 years old, looking for over $20 million, probably not the most prudent way to proceed. Kendall Simmons, also looking for the low 20s, another guy who's fragile, going to be 32 by the start of the season. Probably not the answer. Braden Taylor, we've been talking about, another guy who's fragile. You know, you look at his offense over the course of his career with a 130 OPS plus, 129 WRC plus, a pretty accomplished offensive player. The issue is he's definitely been regressing over the last few years as he gets closer to 30, and he is now fragile physically. If we were going to spend about $20 million and kind of use our entire budget on one of these 3.5 star or higher prospects, or not really prospects, players at this point, I think Taylor would probably be the way to go, but I don't really know that that's what I want to do. We could go, if we wanted to go, with an aging veteran, Wasaburo Akiyama. Durable, looking for $12.5 million. Could definitely plug him into right field, and maybe that would allow us to move Ohtani to a DH role, but don't know that he's a perfect answer. We'll just kind of look at first basemen and outfielders now to maybe get some other ideas. Now, why is Harita listed here if he's allegedly signed with Philadelphia? Am I confused about who he was? Or was he just not listed in the international free agents? No, it was another first baseman, Hisato Suda. Okay. Surprised that Mr. Harita is not listed as one of the top international prospects. I don't love the low work ethic, the low intelligence, the low adaptability, but certainly is an interesting bat. Number one prospect. Was he played independent ball in the United States last year? Very weird background for this player, but viewed as one of the top prospects in baseball. But he's also looking for $22 million, so I don't know that works for us. Lawrence Butler, we need a first baseman or a corner outfielder. He could fill either role for us. Don't love the outfield range. He's 6'4". He's a more than capable defensive infielder, though. He's put up a 117 OPS plus and WRC plus over the course of his major league career with Nashville, and then most recently Washington last year when he led the National League in runs batted in with 111. Also slammed 44 homers, so he's hitting free agency at a good time for him. Guy who's going to strike out a ton. Probably a bit of an upgrade to Takao Ota. I don't know that we'd want to make a long-term commitment to him. He's only looking for a 1-year deal, though. I'd consider it. I don't love it, especially at that kind of money. Ty France has a pretty average-ish offensive profile, and he's definitely been above average in terms of his production over the course of his career, but going to turn 38 next year, looking for almost $9 million. I think I'd go with the 31-year-old Butler for a little more money if that was the direction that we were going to go. You know, none of these guys, just looking very quickly at their contact, their power, and their eye, among these other guys, have overwhelming profiles. Austin Wells, don't love that he's fragile, but another guy who could play first base, corner outfield for us, decent bat. Been pretty productive over the course of his career. With him, it's just a matter of trying to keep him healthy. But if we're looking for a corner outfielder / first baseman / DH to get into the mix with the likes of Ohtani and Basallo, Wells doesn't seem to be a horrible option. He is looking for multiple seasons at that $7 million a year, which I don't love, but could probably structure something with an option year for the third season that might work for us. And honestly, having Wells signed for at least 2 years, given that Ohtani is going to be a free agent after this next season, and it's possible that Basallo's arbitration number is going to get prohibitive for us at some point. And we have to keep in mind that our starting left fielder right now, Vance Honeycutt, is also fragile, even though he's still only in his 20s. Signing Wells for a few years is probably borderline palatable. Another option with Brett Beatty. Been with the Yankees rather than the Mets for a good chunk of his career at this point. So it looks like he has spent more time with the Yankees than the Mets at this point. Led the league in triples once, been a well above average offensive player, 32 years old. Normal in terms of his injury proneness. Could definitely play first base. He could definitely play a corner outfield spot. I think he's a guy that's probably in the mix for us. Jamari Baylor, not looking for huge money. 31 years old, a little bit of pop in the bat. He was with us last year. He honestly looks better. I guess he's marketing himself as a second baseman. He was a corner outfielder with us last year and hit 5 home runs in 144 at-bats before I believe we picked up Kelnick and moved him down to the minors for the rest of the year. So there are options out there. Don't love any of them. Addison Barger is the always nice to have captain personality. Not quite as big a hitter as some of these other guys. Actually has only had a cup of coffee over the years as a major league player and has been a well below average offensive player and hasn't been in the majors since 2028. So he is perhaps a little bit ambitious, looking for $2 million a year in a major league contract. Looks Looks like he's not even willing to consider a minor league contract at this point. Good luck signing with the Ducks. So as I said, I don't love any of the options that are available given the financial constraints that we are under. But I do think that maybe a Brett Beatty is a corner outfielder slash first baseman, and quite honestly a guy who could play third for us certainly if we needed him to. I don't think we want to move Cam Collier back out to the outfield this year, but it would be an option given that he's a pretty good defensive right fielder. But right now, a Brett Beatty at $9-ish million, or an Austin Wells around $7 million for that first base slash corner outfield slash DH role that we still have available. Seems like those two guys to me might be the best paths. Horita would obviously be interesting if not for the massive number he's looking for and the lack of motivation. I guess Lawrence Butler is the other guy that's in the mix here for me. But right now, as free agency opens and we've got potentially about $21 million to spend, a Lawrence Butler or an Austin Wells or a Brett Beatty to be, as I said, our corner infielder, corner outfielder slash DH, along with Basallo and Ohtani, seems like a direction that we could go. And then thinking about the pitchers, I am intrigued given the amount of money that Hayden Yinger is actually looking for. I'm pretty enthusiastic about potentially bringing him back as a guy to be a 5-inning type starter for us again, or perhaps just give us some veteran depth out of the bullpen. Not a long-term commitment and not a ton of money. Obviously feel real good now that we did not offer him that $18.9 million QO, because he certainly would have hit the bid on that one, it would seem. So I think right now I would be leaning towards spending about $4 million on Yinger. And then, as I mentioned, between Butler, Wells, and Beatty, maybe spending $8 to $10 million on one of those guys, which would put us, $12, $13, $14 million spent to bring those two on board. So it still would leave us with $6 to $7 million most likely to play with to take on contracts and trade, potentially pay for guys we pick up in the Rule 5 draft, or get a little more active in free agency down the line. But that definitely fills the big need we have in our lineup to bring one of those hitters on board. And then, as I said earlier in the episode, I don't mind a Susana, Sobotka, Painter, Sullivan, Carrillo rotation if we do move Ohtani to the bullpen. But the opportunity to bring Yinger back for a year at a pretty bargain basement type of contract makes me feel even better about potentially moving Ohtani to be an everyday player. So if you've got strong thoughts on how you would recommend proceeding in free agency, whether you think I'm on the right path, whether I'm on the completely wrong path, I would obviously love to hear them in the comments. And we will see what I decide to do in free agency in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.